I don't know about Chris, but I mind.
Oh. Do I?
I'm pretty chill right now.
Do you mind like going so we can talk?
Oh, fuck's sake. No, but yeah, so Dom, what were your expectations for this con? Like, were you a big Diablo 3 or Diablo fan in the first place?
Okay, so are we just jumping into it right now?
Yeah, why not?
Alright.
Okay, I thought it was an intro and stuff.
Yeah, I know, that's what I was expecting too.
We don't have the budget or funds for that shit yet.
Alright, hey people, Bartender's name is actually Brian Chantrapon, Fireskull's name is Dominic Ritchie, and Chris's name is Confidential. That's all you need.
Yeah, that's good. I like that.
No, I was not a huge Diablo fan. I'm not big on loot games in general, just because, I don't know, the rewards for me are a bit cheapened. But for 3, it was actually the first Diablo game I picked up. I'd seen 2, I think played it maybe for like 5 minutes, but 3 was really my first experience into the franchise.
Did you like 3?
I played it for like, I think maybe 15 hours tops, and then I could keep playing.
Can I ask when you started playing?
At launch.
Okay,
so it was still when it was like peak bad.
Yeah, we were talking earlier about Diablo and how it's recently that there's been like a lot of, they have a history of like messing up, at this point they have a history of messing up announcements or starts of the game of Diablos. I remember, because I've read about what happened through, do you guys know the book Blood, Sweat, and Pixels?
Nope.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they have an entire chapter on Diablo and how they ended up fixing the whole thing. And from that, reading that made it seem like they fixed it completely, like everything was perfect and the fans were satisfied. But it still seems like even after this, like their muck up with Diablo 3, they're still, like, the fans are still, like, unhappy with the state of Diablo. Well,
yeah.
especially right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like BChan said, the expectations were pretty high because of the slot, but all they had to do was pull a Bethesda, because Bethesda's done this twice now, which is, hey guys, here's the next mainline installment of X beloved franchise, but in the meantime, here's the mobile or knockoff version of it, to tide you over. Because they did that with Fallout Shelter while announcing Fallout 4, and then they did it again with Fallout 76, but still announcing Starfield and Elder Scrolls 6. So all they would have had to do was have a graphic that said Diablo 4 at the very end, and I feel like it would have improved optics considerably.
I think that probably is the best way of going about the entire announcement. Yeah, I remember seeing a lot of posts online of people. They have the stands where they can play demos of Diablo, Immortal, and
and there's tumbleweeds going through.
Yeah.
Oh, really? Wait, is that what happened? Oh, I didn't.
It's almost empty. Yeah.
It's it kind of went viral for a little bit. So it's like all these little stations with headphones and a mobile device, and they're just there's one table with 8 people on it, and then tons of empty tables.
No.
But I think Dom's description of how to actually show off the how to properly present the game along with a mainline Diablo game would have been the best way of presenting the mobile game.
Yeah, because it's not like the timelines would be that different. They said Elder Scrolls 6 is probably 2021, 2022. So even if it was even later than that for Diablo 4, that's still fine.
I don't know. There's also a piece to me because I'm not super involved in the Blizzard community. It feels, especially, this is a huge event for people there. I was actually planning on going not too long ago until not being able to make it, and I found that for me, because I'm just a casual person compared to everyone else, that this is the mecca, the huge event. It just seems like somewhere along the line in their side, someone kind of either misunderstood or wasn't. I don't know. They weren't. They misread what their fans were going to expect. there was definitely like a disconnect.
Yeah, like for example, I was really into StarCraft 2. I was a Masters player on ladder. I was in customs pretty heavily, and you could say that much like Diablo 3, there were a lot of disappointed people with StarCraft 2 compared to Brood War. They didn't feel it quite measured up. So if the upcoming BlizzCon had an hour set aside for a StarCraft announcement, and then they announced a mobile version of StarCraft, which I don't even necessarily think would be that bad, but they did it without saying anything about StarCraft 3, oh yeah, people would have been furious, and I would have completely understood why.
But kind of moving on from the Diablo stuff, is there anything else from all of BlizzCon that you think is interesting? Like any cool news that was worth talking about, or any, I don't know, anything that grabbed your attention?
I think the Ashe reveal is a good microcosm of how a lot of cultural issues are being brought into like announcements of games and characters in games. Because a lot of people, a lot of people were mad that McCree basically shows up, this new badass female gunslinger, in her reveal, right?
Right.
Yeah. And then also there was apparently concept art of her as a woman of color in at least a few pieces of the concept. So there were some cries about her being whitewashed as well.
Oh,
right.
Okay.
I remember seeing that, because it's interesting you made that point, because the first video I saw was actually the debut of her abilities. So I didn't see the actual cinematic until afterwards. That being said, they didn't really, just based off the cinematic, you didn't really know exactly what she could have done. And it felt also a little sloppy in some ways. The concept art was an issue, and it seemed a bit tone deaf in terms of the having McCree show up, beat up this new hero they were all hyped about, and then move on. They also made some other announcements. They kind of teased a second character in that as well, the AI character.
Yeah.
Do you remember that?
Yeah, about that character. I thought that was the outcry. I thought that was the main outcry. I did not know anything about the whole cultural aspect of Ashe at all. Yeah, I thought it was the AI character that people were like, hey, shouldn't Ashe get her own feature thing? And now we're more interested in the AI character? What the hell?
This also seems like an issue that could have been solved if they made the announcement later on.
Mm-hmm.
In some ways, because I think this is more of an issue of having so much going on, that this huge character Ashe could be bigger if it was presented as its own thing. It's almost an issue as like the content they have to show, which is frustrating to make content in general. But having that presented with everything else, it's all competing against each other in some ways. The cultural stuff you mentioned, it's either, I can see that being very tone deaf. Just like all these little things that you don't think people will realize it's going to be more important.
Yeah, and I think, at least for me, the two things I mentioned, the trailer and the concept art, aren't equally tone deaf in my mind. Because it's one thing to have concept art for a character that includes the possibility of them being a woman of color or having different ethnicities, but as long as it's not part and parcel to the character, like they're not from China, or they're not from Africa, or from an ethnic location, or it's part of their backstory, that's one thing, and then changing it isn't inherently insulting or meant as an attack.
Right, because at that point, it's ideation and anything's available. It's all about just figuring out what the character was.
Exactly, whereas the cinematic trailers are only for optics. They're entirely marketing material to hype you up for the character. And I think those criticisms are a lot more valid.
Right. I did remember after I watched the cinematic, I was really interested in whatever overall plot is kind of building up, or seems they kind of play up that there is. It did take away the idea of like the characters that I want to play as, because I remember leaving at the end of that trailer not really caring about Ashe and her crew. They just kind of came out of nowhere, got their asses kicked, and then we followed McCree and this new AI character.
She didn't even fire any shots. Well, I mean, just a few.
I know she did. She didn't hit anything. She like hit a rock.
Okay.
Well, she did literally hit something.
Oh wait, what? Oh right.
Because you could say that she does get a certain amount of comeuppance by having a nice fist to McCree's face.
Oh.
That's true. I feel like if we saw, and then we're kind of just talking back and forth to this thing, maybe because they hint at a backstory between the two characters. If we saw that and saw the dynamic between the two, maybe explaining McCree's robotic arm, and then maybe those have a tie, basically balancing out what's going on between the two. But do you guys want to move on from Ash? Is there anything else you thought was interesting? Like there was some Warhammer stuff that wasn't just WoW.
Warcraft 3.
Yeah, I could talk a bit about Warcraft 3.
Are you a fan of Warcraft series?
Well, I'm a huge RTS fan, and I've played basically modded versions of StarCraft to make it like Warcraft.
Really?
Yeah, and so for those who don't know, and including Chris and BChan, I don't know your guys' experience. More or less, Warcraft 3 is the precursor to the MOBA genre. It was the first kind of game that had, okay, yes, you can control these little units, but you also have heroes that are stronger and their items and their abilities. So, for those who have no frame of reference, take an RTS you recognize, like Age of Empires or StarCraft, smash it together with Dota or League of Legends, and that's basically what you get with Warcraft.
By the way, Dom, correct me if I'm wrong. Warcraft 3 was it not the base game that spawned Diablo?
Dota?
Yeah, Dota and Diablo, or is it just Dota?
I'm not sure about Diablo. I know it didn't spawn that genre, but it might have popularized.
Okay, but for sure it was like the bait. Like what? Dota was the mod.
Yeah, it was straight up that was the mod. Yeah.
Okay, that's cool. But sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was cool. I'm not an RTS fan too much, and to me, they're very intimidating. I'm more of like someone that enjoys things that have immediate feedback and action.
Did you know
and
StarCraft back in the day?
I tried. It was a bit hard.
That's understandable.
Because you see people that are really good, and then you try it, and you're just overwhelmed.
Oh god.
But seeing this new remaster really like it is now in like my mind as something I would like to try, and maybe it's something to bring me in and maybe make me more of a fan. Because I mentioned earlier, the Blizzard IPs are just not something I'm directly into. If anything, Overwatch is like the biggest one. That's just because it's more real time and it's an FPS shooter. And all the characters, like, I can... Overwatch is what made me realize, oh, they're really good at crafting characters. Not just not just into writing, but like every aspect is just so well detailed and thought out.
Yeah, I definitely agree that it might be a good entry point for new people, because the RTS genre is pretty intimidating, right? Like, if MOBAs are intimidating because there's a lot happening on screen, then RTS both has a lot of things happening on screen and a lot of things the player's expected to do on screen. So I definitely think Warcraft, which has a strong single-player presence, might help kind of push that back into the public eye, alongside Age of Empires 4.
I was going to say there's a bit of a, I don't want to say resurgence, but it's been growing more popularity. I think a lot of people are being more drawn into it lately. It's we had a discussion a while back about like cycles of popularity, and I can see RTS having something of a resurgence, or maybe a blip or a growth in it, and this could help with that.
Yeah, well, and actually, funnily enough, talking about mobile announcements that are then followed by main franchise announcements, Command & Conquer announced a mobile installment, and then based on interest, also announced a new mainline installment. So we have that, and we also have Age of Empires. So that's two huge RTS franchises that, seem to be coming back.
Oh, by the way, Dom, in regards to RTSs in general, there was something that Christian, J. Cho, and I were discussing a few days ago about how... Well, let me just ask you this. Do you think the games genre will become cyclical in terms of trends?
No, because so long as there are advances in technology, it will represent fundamental changes in most genres. So as long as we're still pushing things like how we interface with games forward, like think of how many franchises would be different if you were forced to play them in VR, just as a basic example, and then transplant that on every piece of engineering. So no, I don't see it happening cyclically.
I can actually add to that. What comes to mind with that example is Splatoon in the third-person, first-person shooter genre.
Yeah.
Because that is one of the first games for me that used motion controls as part of aiming and had made that be a huge... For me, it became like my most favorite way to actually control FPS with a controller, because I don't know why, it kind of gave you that fine-tuned movement and precision that you get in a mouse, along with the control aspect. I guess the nice parts of a FPS and a control, which is like a nice tactile feel, and that is an example of how genres are evolving on top of existing convention as well as technology.
Yeah, that's actually something I've talked a lot about before, which is increasingly genres aren't isolated anymore, just because it's become so much more accessible to get certain mechanics into games. So like you almost don't see any action games come out that don't have certain customizability options. But that's not specific to the RPG genre anymore. It doesn't make them RPG games. And you're seeing that more or less across the board, as you have like, oh, okay, there's an item system in my, like loot management game, or
there's a level up system in my open world racing game.
Yeah. Great example.
It's interesting. I want to bring up an article I remember reading Kotaku about the differences between that evolution and how Rockstar went with the open world design of Red Dead 2, and then the open world of Assassin's Creed Odyssey, and how those two seem to be branching off different points of origin. To condense the article, it was saying how a lot of Assassin's Creed Origins, a lot of stuff from that, not Origins, Odyssey, stems from the design of Far Cry 3. That's like the first game to be popular and known for its towers and its really busy UI for its maps and all these little mechanics and designs that kind of carried over and have been popular in a lot of open world games.
So was their argument?
Oh, sorry, I wasn't done yet. But then they were talking about how in Red Dead 2, they seem to be taking almost more from the sim aspect of Far Cry 2, how that is more kind of realistic, slower, it's a bit more punishing. They don't really give you that much in terms of like information UI. It's more up to the player to kind of learn and figure out. There's less hand-holding, essentially.
Yeah, I think one of the big differences you can see where the two diverge is in their focus, because Odyssey, you can select this new exploration mode, which minimizes UI elements across the entire game and makes it, well, supposedly more immersive, but it's incorporated as a choice. Whereas Red Dead 2, they focused on cinematic kind of appearances, and that being a core part of the game experience.
Mm-hmm. I have not played too much of Red Dead 2. I've seen a lot of videos. It's more one of those things I'm afraid to get because it will consume me. And I see there's a lot of...
Good. It's looking so damn good.
I have watched a lot of Euphoria engine horse crashing videos. It's just like all the ways to fall off. And there's a lot of sim aspects in some ways, or maybe light sim, I describe it, because you have to take care of your relationship with your horse, their health, your hygiene, your hair. All these things are happening in this space. And another part from the article I thought was interesting is how they mentioned how this game breaks convention, and they mentioned how they find it more they enjoyed how there's this change in pace and tone, and it's almost like black and white when compared to other games. They also saw that with Breath of the Wild, that would break a lot of open world convention and Zelda convention in terms of design.
Yeah.
Do you think that's a general? I guess moving forward, as games kind of adopt more and more of each other's mechanics, would that be more advisable? Would that be something that we can maybe bring into the core goals of a project?
I think that has a lot to do with expectations that people attach onto franchises. Because, Rockstar has garnered this reputation for a focus on cinematics over maybe more punchy gameplay mechanics. And so if they suddenly came out with Red Dead 2 and it felt amazing but it wasn't cinematic at all, people would be like, well, what happened to that? Whereas another franchise which might not be known for that as much, Assassin's Creed, which has cinematic gameplay moments but not as much a focus on the overarching feel of cinema, then people might not even notice if it was gone.
That's a... no, I like that. I think that's... almost makes you bring up another question. Do you think people are almost limited by the expectations that the audience places upon the devs? Or is that something you think should be encouraged or fought? I'm trying to think of ways of... because what I notice is that with these projects that end up having to... I'm going back to the article. That end up falling on... breaking convention that's been kind of standardized over the past few years. They tend to hit people... they kind of resonate with people a little bit more. From what... I might be speaking maybe a little too short term. We might find out later it doesn't. But do you think this... if you're trying to make a project that really gets an audience and grabs people's attention... could this be a good way of creating that?
So I had the luxury of being a design intern at Treyarch a couple of years ago. Technically, I was working on Black Ops 4, but it was really just doing intern things that is like, well, this is what you would actually be doing for a game, but we'll probably never use it. But one of the things that really struck me about Treyarch's design philosophy is their focus on use cases. So everything they do is garnered for, okay, what use cases are we including? Which ones are being excluded? Is this factoring in with our plan? Is this what we want to do? And so you have often dozens of distinct use cases that have to be considered for any one idea being put forward. And it really can feel like you're sort of hamstrung in a way, like your hands are tied, because you can't go too far in innovation, but you also don't want to make it the same thing as before. And you have to kind of stay in that gray area. I see that gray area, that figurative gray area, as shrinking more and more the more people try to play into it. Because I think because I think people are increasingly realizing that people play these different games in these genres for different reasons. And it could be that Rainbow Six Siege got a lot of the strategic shooter people. So, okay, maybe they are not playing COD as much anymore. But then COD comes out with Blackout, and suddenly it attracts all these new Battle Royale people. So I see that as a dangerous play to continue working in that gray area without considering how to branch outside of it.
Again, just to clarify, by the gray area, you mean the genre that people expect them to stay in?
Not the genre, because this is talking about different installments of the game, but more so with the previous installment, how similar or different from it is.
So it's a bit more, like you mentioned, expectation, and how you can work within that gray area of what would be considered the expectation on next project, next game.
Exactly. And you also see this more and more with different countries and targeting different countries, because I don't know if you guys saw the Rainbow Six Siege uproar for the past few days.
I saw.
What's that?
Yeah. So basically, what happened is they're releasing Rainbow Six Siege in China, but they have to censor different parts of the game for the Chinese release. But instead of doing what most companies do and having two different versions of it, they're censoring the same version of Siege worldwide and keeping it just the one version.
So specifically things that were taken out were references to gambling, so slot machines, cards. I think there was also gore. So skulls. I'm not sure if they're dead. I haven't seen dead bodies in the game, but maybe there are, just laying around. All these things were removed and patched out.
Completely.
It's yeah,
Completely.
Oh shit.
and there's a bit of an uproar.
Yeah. And it's important to mention, not all of these changes make any thematic sense, because, taking away dead bodies is going to be universally, unintuitive. That makes no sense realistically, no matter what. But for example, if there's a map and it's like you're fighting a gang with gambling machines, and they're changing it from a casino, just for example, to a fast food chain, that doesn't make any sense, whereas the one previously did.
Is that the kind of changes they're making? I thought they're just taking them out, just maybe removing an asset. Shoot.
They're retexturing some things too.
Okay.
I don't know. I feel like that I'm thinking of the best case scenario, but this is basically if this was more of a Fortnite where the levels are known to change. I can see them maybe adding new things in to replace the current set of items and asset. It seems like because the decision was to integrate China into the base game, they have to go under all these different laws that are exclusive to China.
That make no sense in many cases.
Yeah, there's
let's remove references to gambling, but keep the loot boxes in the game.
China has a lot of interesting weird rules. I actually like the ones for film. There's you can't have sorcery or magic, but
What?
certain things are that's another.
Do you have a list of this? I want to see now.
Oh, you can
China has
find
some
one.
Weird
Yeah,
rules.
it's-
What the hell?
There's also they have I don't know if this law still exists, but if a certain percentage of your film was filmed in China, it would be considered a Chinese film, and it'd be automatically included and allowed to be distributed within China. Where beforehand, only a small number of non-Chinese films were allowed into the country. That's why things like Transformers, or even I think another one would be Iron Man 3, where in China's government eyes, Chinese films, because they were partially filmed in China.
Right.
A
Oh,
big
they
one
have-
for that was Pacific Rim 2.
Oh yeah, but that's for the film. This is how they're kind of changing and adapting to kind of think of a global audience. For games, I think it's still very segregated in a lot of ways. The Chinese market's very different, mostly because the way they consume games is different than Western audiences. I think mobile is still a huge thing, and
Yeah.
PC games are big, like PC bars and everything. I think that someone described it to me, I'm speaking kind of secondhand here, that they don't see or having a console in the living room as a concept that is that is not a thing that's normal. That's that goes against their convention of how games are consumed.
Yeah, and there's also certain meta cultural aspects. So a big example is that in many areas of Eastern culture, they don't see pay to win as bad necessarily. They see it as sort of well, duh, that matters kind of attitude. And whereas a lot of Western areas feel it's unfair or that it's unjustified.
Why do you think that happened, or how did the gaming culture in East Asia develop like that?
Well, I can talk about China directly because they suppressed Sony and Microsoft for a very long time. So you had all of these third-party developers or knockoff developers making these reskin games and then charging a lot for them. So the value proposition between what you're paying for and what you're getting was more skewed, whereas the rest of the world had it more standardized. A new console game costs $60, and this is what you expect to get from it. They didn't have that kind of thinking developed there.
So
It also-
in China, like a AAA game like Red Dead Redemption 2, for example, would not be $60. Like it would just be.
No, that's not what I'm saying. It's just they didn't. The gaming industry did not grow there, getting people used to those ideas.
Oh, okay, sorry, got it. Okay.
So how we're all used to the idea of DLC at this point, after 8 to 10 years of having different versions, some that are good and some that are bad, but it's mostly accepted. Over there, the ideas of having a console is still very unheard of or unpopular. I remember hearing, this is back at school, back at USC, I think he either had a Tencent employee or someone that worked specifically with China talking about how most of the audiences are into competitive and multiplayer games. But that meant all these kind of indie, smaller, more single-player, even story-focused games don't perform well, even though it's a huge population. Like, I guess if you even get 1 or 2%, you're still getting millions of people. That being said, it's still very niche. They have their own tastes in terms of, because things return in a different way.
Yeah, so it's a very different atmosphere over there.